precisely half an hour. We know that your schedules are quite busy, and we are going to do a series of webinars weekly, but we're hopeful to get to the finish line darned quickly, and you'll see more, team, about what it will take to get to the finish line. I just want to underscore this map that you're seeing right now. I'm Mike Gordon, co-chair of Sustainable Westchester. I have with me Chris Burdick, co-chair of Sustainable Westchester and supervisor of the town of Bedford, Greg Hale of the governor's office, and who am I missing?
Ellen Conrad is on with us too.
Yep, Ellen Conrad, who will delineate basically communication roles and communication responsibilities. This is an amazing accomplishment. The green in this map are the communities that have passed local laws to move into community choice aggregation. And we're articulating this, the best way we can describe it is as the Westchester Smart Power Program. Let's move. This is a quick overview of our webinar. So we're going to go over what we have achieved to date. It is amazing. The challenge, Greg Hale will articulate, and we will then focus on what that translates into with respect to a local opportunity, how we're going to communicate going forward, and Ellen Conrad will be presenting around that, the near-term implementation challenges, and we've got a near-term step which is critical, probably the only major challenge we have left. And then we're going to go into some details around the power options, but really that details around that are going to come in more depth in next week's webinar. Let's move forward. So this process has been an amazing process to date, and I want to underscore this second bullet point, the elected officials ran sessions. There have been remarkable achievements. They've really been led by the elected officials who have engaged our communities pretty darn deeply. And these sessions have run as long as 2 hours. I want to spotlight that and move on. Everything else, I think, is self-explanatory. So you'll see that one of the things that we achieved in the previous slide was to get a real treasure trove of data from Con Ed and NYSEG. And this is just one example of the data that we've received. This is what our communities spend for the 1 peak hour of peak electrical use in our county. Plenty of more data, but I think this underscores the challenge that Greg Hale and the governor's office has been dealing with. So I'd like to turn this over to you, Greg, to talk about how this translates into the state and how you're looking at this long-term, as well as some other exciting things that have been forthcoming in the last 2 days from the governor's office. Greg?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you folks. I want to emphasize how well aligned this Westchester CCA initiative is with New York State energy policy. We are undertaking a comprehensive strategy to restructure the state's entire energy system. It's called REV, which stands for Reforming the Energy Vision. And the 3 top notes are we're trying to create a system that's clean, resilient, and affordable. And to do that, it's a very complex undertaking. Can't possibly get through it all in this call, but I'll hit some highlights for you. We published a state energy plan earlier this year that set targets, clean energy targets for the year 2030 for New York State. And they were a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector and transportation sector, 23% savings in energy use by buildings statewide from a 2012 baseline, and then a 50% goal for producing electricity by renewable energy by 2030. These were targets, and basically were going to be addressed, well, are being addressed through a number of initiatives and then private sector activity. But today, I can confirm a New York Times story that appeared today that the governor has announced that he plans to order the PSC, our Public Service Commission, to mandate the 50% renewable energy standard by 2030. So that adds teeth and an enforcement mechanism to the targets that we published earlier. So what that's showing you is that the governor is putting greater and greater emphasis on the energy revolution that we're undertaking in the state and on the climate issue. So as I mentioned, it's a very complicated strategy. It's multifaceted, comprehensive, and it involves a very broad restructuring of the utility regulatory structure, revamping the state's energy programs through its energy office called NYSERDA, and a couple of very important principles that underscore the whole project are stimulating private sector markets that become sustainable and offer private sector opportunity to invest capital in the clean energy space, and then a wide-scale community municipal engagement. We really need communities to step up, and Sustainable Westchester, I can say, is on the forefront here, but you're in good company throughout the state. You're not undertaking this alone. Let me talk just really quickly about these numbers here. If you total them up, I just did a rough run through in my head. I came up with somewhere between $30 and $35 million just in the county of Westchester that you're paying for capacity charges. And what that means, the overall energy grid uses 54% of its capital assets on an annual basis, meaning that 46% are sitting idle. And that's because we built the system to satisfy peak demand, the time of the year when the most energy is being demanded, and it's generally on a hot summer afternoon. And it's not only that we've paid to invest all of the capital to build out this system, but we actually have to pay these charges called standby charges that you pay to the generators to have the capacity available when it's called on. And so for the rest of the year, you're not actually using the asset, but you're paying all this money. So statewide, that runs into the billions in capacity payments over the year, and that's where we want to focus our energy restructuring, is instead of, and peak demand continues to rise, traditionally we would build more capital assets to transmit and distribute the power and generate more power just to meet the peak. But now if we change the whole structure so that we focus on investments that manage the peak and shift demand to other times of day, then we'll be spending money much more wisely, creating a more efficient system and saving everybody money. And the CCA proposal that you're working on is a piece of doing exactly that, because we will develop price signals statewide that provide more value for improvements that improve the system efficiency. So these are details we need to leave for another day. I just want to again emphasize that what you're doing with the CCA and getting to solar power that produces during peak and can use batteries to store and shift demand is critical to what we're trying to accomplish in the state. So I appreciate your leadership out there.
Thank you very much, Greg. And so what I hear is two things. This peak demand problem is a critical problem for the state, and it's a critical opportunity for us locally. And we'll underscore in detail how it is an opportunity more in next week's webinar, honestly, than in this one. The second piece that Greg is spotlighting is the fact that because we're committed to building all of this renewable, that community choice aggregation, or smart, what we're calling Westchester Smart Power, is an opportunity for that renewable to actually have a buyer for its assets, an extraordinary opportunity near term. And now what I'd like to do, and that's a natural segue to Ellen, because it's how are we actually going to communicate that opportunity to our communities going forward. And I'd like to turn this over to Ellen Conrad, who is co-chair of the board of Bedford 2020 and one of the most driven and capable individuals I have ever met in my entire life.
Thank you, Mike. All righty. You've heard from Greg, who set out the challenge and the opportunity that is inherent in this program. I want to first of all commend all of the elected officials, because you all have been doing the hard work. Adopting the legislation and bringing this opportunity to your residents and small businesses is really extraordinary. Bedford 2020 sees community choice aggregation, and in particular the opt-up to 100% renewable, as a game changer for both Westchester County and New York State in shifting demand away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. Our expertise in particular is community outreach, connecting with sustainability and environmental leaders in all the communities in Westchester County. Our goal is to do this on a grassroots level, to make it a turnkey operation with minimal work on the part of municipal leaders. We've already done some initial outreach and have received an extraordinary response from members of the sustainability committees and environmental leaders in Westchester County, and we look forward to giving you much more information about the details that are set forth on this slide. Thank you.
Before we leave that slide, let's go back to that slide. I want to underscore that there are two key constituencies here. It's our consumer constituency and it's our environmental, quote unquote, sustainability constituency. And what we're going to prove, I believe, near term, is that we can do very smart things for consumers simultaneous with greening our power through efficiency and high renewable rate participation. Obviously more to come, but we really feel that we're doing nothing less than unifying those two constituencies. So let's move forward to the next slide. Here's our key near-term challenge, and really, we've done everything except this. We need to together come up with a structure, or no, we need to agree on this energy services agreement. And obviously, we have sent out a 35-page agreement, 36, 37, I'm not precisely sure. What you'll see when you dig into it, and as a by the way, we are seeking strategic approaches to reduce any legal expense associated with looking at this. But ultimately, what you'll see over the next 2 months, listen to me, sorry, 2 weeks, is that these 35 pages are mostly dedicated toward protecting the municipalities. So let's move to the next, and I'm going to turn this over to Chris, who is my co-chair, who has really helped to fashion a kind of responsible and somewhat automatic process going forward. Chris Burdick?
Yes, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And I am going to put on my hat for a moment as a supervisor, recognizing the concerns that other elected officials, supervisors and mayors will have going forward with reviewing the energy service agreement. And that's an agreement that's going to be between Sustainable Westchester, the municipality, and the energy supplier. So I ask myself, and I think that other elected officials would be asking themselves, as will their constituents, how do we get comfortable? How do we have the assurance that the energy supplier is creditworthy and that the winning bid meets the specifications that's set out in the RFP that's put out for them to bid on? So the process that we're planning on putting into place as a component of the energy service agreement is that there will be an independent certification that would be done by a recognized accounting firm, that one will be to vet the energy supplier's creditworthiness to carry out the obligations under its agreement, and the second is that the winning bid, in fact, meets the criteria, meets the bid requirements and specifications. And why are we setting it up this way? We're setting it up this way so that there doesn't have to be an enormous amount of back and forth between Sustainable Westchester and each of the municipalities to say, okay, we have the bid in, you have 1 hour to get back to us as to whether or not you're in and whether or not you're going to go forward. That's placing an enormous burden on each municipality, not to mention a burden on Sustainable Westchester to try to manage all that. Let's bear in mind that energy is a commodity. And like any other commodity, it's extremely fast moving. And so that bid is only going to be alive for a very short period of time. So the concept is to attach to the energy service agreement itself exactly what that form of certification would be from each of the accounting firms. So the municipality knows exactly what they would be getting. And that if, in fact, they receive the completed accountant's opinion following the receipt of the winning bid, then it would immediately bind that municipality. So the municipality has an opportunity ahead of time to say, am I comfortable with going forward on that basis? Am I comfortable with seeing that having well-regarded accounting firms providing that certification gives me the assurance as an elected official, as well as the assurance that my constituents need, that this is going to work?
And as a by the
I know that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
As a by the way, I'm sure that this is going to be an area around which we're going to get a lot of questions in the next couple of days. And so I think I want to underscore that we really want folks here now to be sending in questions that you've got. And don't worry if you think it's possible we'll be dealing with it later in the 8 minutes we have left. Send them in, and we'll also be taking your questions consistently over the next, not just several minutes, but next several days.
You know, one last thing so that we can get on to the next slide. I hear you with 8 minutes left. Opt-out is something that I know here in Bedford we're going to make abundantly clear to our community. You can opt out at any time at no charge. I'm referring to consumers being able to opt out of their agreement to be within the program.
Perfect. Let's move on. Thanks, Chris. All right, so I'm going to do this really fast. The only thing near term that we're going to focus on is orienting the Westchester Smart Power leadership. That first bullet point, that's the only time-sensitive piece, and we're talking about a number of meetings that have already been scheduled, and we want to underscore, we'd like to have meetings with 24 communities. We've currently scheduled 12. Okay, let's move on. This is basically, we will, I think you've seen this, and this is akin to what Chris was saying. One, the fixed price bid has to be lower than the 12-month average. You'll see that delineated in the next slide. Two, there's a free customer opt-out anytime, right at the beginning or even later as it's ongoing. There's also opt-in, okay? And there is an indemnification feature in the contract that the municipality is protected by the ESCO. Let's move forward. So this is basically just a visual on the fixed price. If you see that wiggly line on the left, that's where the utility price has been going over the last 12 months. If you see the dotted line, that's the average over the last 12 months. A compliant bid will be less than that average. We're going to get a fixed price, and the intent is to get a fixed price for 3 years, and this question mark is a potential value to the contract that we will be exploring next week in more depth, but it's a value for energy efficiency that we achieve. More on that next week. Renewable, let's move on. Ellen, I'm sending it right back to you to explore this clean power option.
Well, this is all of the customers that are part of the Community Choice Aggregation program will have an option to opt up to 100%, and we're not sure whether it's all going to be just 100, maybe it'll be 50, but probably 100%. And when they do so, they will probably have to pay a slight premium for that, but we're hoping it is not going to be very high. And as Mike has pointed out, there is a high potential for rebates and saving money later. But we will be launching a community-wide outreach campaign to educate people about the whole energy revolution that Greg has talked about, and in particular the CCA, and in particular a residence or a small business's option to exercise this opt-up to 100% renewable. Because this impacts, if you think about what is the impact of getting rid of fossil fuels and having 100% renewable sources for electricity in Westchester County or New York State, this impacts health concerns, it impacts water quality concerns, it impacts environmental concerns, it impacts wildlife concerns. So we will be reaching out to every conceivable entity that would have an interest in seeing climate change being addressed, and we think we're going to get a very high number of people opting up.
This is, I guess, am I back on speaker?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So this is really the timeline going forward. A lot of you have already made appointments. We'd love to engage full boards wherever possible over the next week and a half. We will have a couple more progress webinars. I'm hopeful that we will only have a few more, and that we'll be at the finish line. It is our intent to have this energy service agreement done, agreed to, at least on our side, by December 14th. And we then will be able to issue our RFP either before Christmas or shortly after the first week of January. 2 weeks later, we intend to award the bid, and then service would be forthcoming roughly, I think the notice goes out 7 days after that. That's a real outline of the process. I'll give you more details when I meet with you individually. When we meet with you individually, I'd like to underscore, please get us any questions that you've got, and we can get you anything that you want in advance of our meetings because that'll just make the meetings more valuable. That's really it. Communication and any other questions from any other statements from any other panelist, we welcome. Raise your hand.
This is Leo Wigman. If I could just mention briefly that the Energy Services Agreement, which Mike has mentioned, is a relatively technical and detailed document. We have quite a bit of markup in it already, and we'd be happy to circulate that, I think, to recirculate it as we have it now to any municipal partners, as well as this particular slide deck as well. We did upload the latest sort of map for showing which 24 municipalities are currently in the CCA program to the Westchester.org Community Choice Aggregation webpage, which you can find there. And we're happy to try to make as much information as available to you. We are looking and speaking with well-regarded accounting and auditing firms with respect to checking the creditworthiness of the final bidders to give us assurances with that in mind.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all for the amazing accomplishments to date. It's a very short trip to the finish line. Yeah, thanks panel for engaging so actively, intelligently, and clearly.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Mike, and also Greg, of course.
And so we are coming off.
And Ellen.
And Ellen, yes. Poor.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work out there.
Ciao, guys. I don't know.